Marybeth spent a long time in front of the bathroom mirror, examining her reflection. She felt that she looked much older than the last time she had scrutinized herself so closely. The wrinkles around her eyes had deepened. Her nasolabial folds were longer and more pronounced, and grey was starting to show at her temples. "My God, how terrible!" Marybeth muttered, pulling her face away. She was shocked at how much she had aged. She wasn't even 40 yet. Only 38, but she looked 7 to 10 years older, according to her mirror reflection. "Mum, hurry up! Cheryl needs to use the bathroom!" A knock on the door snapped Marybeth back to reality. It was 8 a.m. and they needed to leave the house at 8:40. Quickly she brushed her teeth, rinsed her face, applied cream, and lamented that she didn't have time for a facial mask. "I never have enough time for myself," Marybeth thought angrily as she exited the bathroom. Her children, 16-year-old Stacy, 10-year-old Zachary, and 5-year-old Cheryl, were lined up in the hallway. "You'd spend 100 more years in there," Stacy said rudely, nudging her mother aside and entering the bathroom, pulling her younger sister Cheryl by the hand. "Cheryl, let's hurry up or we'll be late for school. You can thank your mother for this." "Thank you?" squeaked Cheryl, who seemed unclear about why she was thanking her mother, whether for the potential tardiness or for finally vacating the bathroom. Marybeth sighed heavily. Every day communicating with Stacy became increasingly burdensome. Her older teenage daughter had become disrespectful, disregarded Marybeth's opinions, and was always irritated when Marybeth voiced her perspective. "What would you know about it?" the eldest daughter used to retort, pulling a disgruntled face. "My dear, I'm not 100 years old yet, and I haven't been 16 years old for a long time." Marybeth tried to reason with Stacy, even though she could clearly see that her words had no effect. Stacy only rolled her eyes and made noises of disapproval, making it abundantly clear that she considered her mother's opinions to be of little importance in their household. "You may not be 100 years old, but you certainly don't look 38. Stacy was insensitive. "Have you looked at yourself in the mirror lately? You look like an old woman. You've neglected yourself. You don't dye your hair. You don't do manicures. You don't even know how to use makeup. Have you seen Katie Lenehan's mum? She's beautiful. She's 42, and she looks like she's not even 30. Marybeth remained silent. Though she wanted to rebuke Stacy about Katie Lenehan's mother, she had a wealthy husband who allowed her not to work and spend her days in beauty salons and malls. She also had her own driver, cook and housekeeper. Everything was in place for Katie's mum to maintain her appearance. "Stacy, you know I can't afford beauty parlours and masseurs." Marybeth tried to explain, though she felt embarrassed. "I'm on my own. We also have our granny who needs care and medication. It's not my fault that I don't have a wealthy husband who can afford all my beauty treatments." Stacy glanced at her mother and set aside a sandwich she'd been about to bite into, changing her mind for some reason. "Are you serious now?" scoffed the eldest daughter. "Who's to blame for us living like beggars? For you working as a simple receptionist in a third-rate hotel, and for the four of us living in 40 square meters. I've seen pictures of you when you were young. You were beautiful. Why didn't you marry a decent man? Where's my father? Someone like Katie Lenehan's dad. Why are you silent, Mum?" Marybeth felt the urge to fling the cooled tea in her cup at her daughter, but as a mother of 3, she had long since learned the rule of counting to 10. If she ever felt the impulse to do something rash that could lead to drama and trouble, she'd simply count to 10 in her mind. By the time she finished, her nerves would have calmed and the urge to act impulsively would have faded. The rule always worked, just like it did this time. You shouldn't talk about your father in such a way, Marybeth said slowly, enunciating each word as she twirled the cup with the remaining tea in her hands. You know, your father Scott passed away 3 years ago. Scott wasn't my father, Stacy retorted sharply, forcing her mother to apply the rule of 10 again. Just because I was 5 when you and he met and started your lives together doesn't mean I don't have other memories. Scott was the father of Cheryl and Zachary, not me. So don't associate me with something that doesn't concern me. Marybeth sighed, realizing arguing with her daughter was futile. Every day, Stacy grew older, becoming more insolent, rude, and arrogant. Previously, such traits were absent in her. Marybeth saw in Stacy an uncanny resemblance to Anna, her paternal grandmother, the one who had never met her granddaughter. Strangely, but with each passing year, Stacy mirrored Anna more closely, leading Marybeth to fear that her daughter might become the monster that her grandmother had been. Scott raised you from the age of 5, and for 8 years he treated you as his own daughter, Marybeth said. That's his problem, Stacy retorted defiantly. I never saw him as my father, never called him Dad, and he knew it all along. Mum, why do you keep insisting that Scott is my father? We both know that isn't true. Because we were a family, Marybeth tried to explain. Don't be ridiculous. Stacy laughed dismissively. What kind of family? He betrayed you, and you overlooked it. We were never a family. Marybeth felt a wave of anger. Each sentence spoken by her eldest daughter felt like a blow. It was as if Stacy was intentionally using her words to inflict pain on her mother, seemingly deriving pleasure from the humiliation. Marybeth couldn't believe the words she was hearing from her own child, her beloved daughter, whose life she had fought so hard for. Arguing with Stacy was futile. At 16, Stacy was convinced she knew more about life than her mother. She saw Marybeth as a failure, a woman who had achieved nothing. Marybeth was a mother of 3, single, working a lowly job, caring for a sick mother-in-law. To Stacy, her mother held no authority. Every word Marybeth spoke was met with resistance and often led to insults or heated arguments. The morning unfolded as usual. By the time Stacy and her younger sister Cheryl emerged from the bathroom, Marybeth had already prepared breakfast, setting 3 bowls of porridge, sliced bread, and warm milk on the table. Ugh, warm milk again? Stacy complained, pushing the glass away. Her younger sister followed suit, leaving only Zachary to enjoy his porridge, bread and milk. It's not warm, it's from the refrigerator, Marybeth replied in a voice that brooked no objection. Stacy's defiant behaviour was beginning to annoy her, especially as she displayed it in front of her younger sister. Cheryl adored Stacy, and Marybeth feared that her younger daughter would see Stacy as a role model. In some aspects, Stacy could be a good example, but certainly not in her attitude and manner of speaking to her mother. The porridge is all sticky, Stacy objected. Cooking is obviously not your thing. Marybeth clenched her teeth, and then suddenly decided she had had enough of her eldest daughter's complaints. Silently, she moved to the table and took the plate of porridge and glass of milk away from the table. Stacy's face showed surprise. Are you going to leave me without breakfast? She asked sarcastically. Marybeth looked at her daughter quizzically. And what should I do? Shall I cook a separate dish for you, while everyone else quietly eats their porridge and risks being late for school? If you cooked properly, you wouldn't have to waste time and products, Stacy snapped. If you're not happy with my cooking, Then get up earlier and cook yourself. Set the alarm for 6 a.m. and then prepare us all a meal. Why are you looking at me like that? Are you surprised by my suggestion? Stacy abruptly left the table and disappeared into another room. Cheryl, who had been silently watching the conflict between her mother and older sister, idly stirred her spoon in her dish, managing to swallow only a spoonful of porridge. Annoyed with her eldest daughter, Marybeth took the plate from Cheryl, tossed it into the sink with a clatter, and issued commands. Get ready, we're leaving. Cheryl, you'll eat in the kindergarten. And Zachary, stop eating so much bread. You're on your third piece. Your pants will soon burst. Zachary glanced grudgingly at his mother but continued to chew. Marybeth watched the children with a weary look, then leaned against the refrigerator and closed her eyes. It was only 8:30 in the morning, and she was already tired and drained. She wondered where she would find the strength to work for 10 hours, then go grocery shopping, prepare dinner, help Zachary with his homework, put Cheryl to bed, and prepare for another challenging day. The four of them stepped outside. It took Marybeth about 5 minutes to warm up the car before they drove away from the house. Drop me off at the corner, Stacy requested, to which Marybeth, her mother, responded in surprise. Why? Do you want to go to the store? Stacy shook her head. I don't want my classmates to see the kind of car we drive. Our car is fine, Zachary countered from the back seat. Marybeth gave a small smile at her son through the rearview mirror. It's not a car, it's a piece of junk. If you enjoy driving it, it doesn't mean that I like it too. Unlike you, I don't want to look like a beggar, Stacy retorted. Marybeth gripped the steering wheel tighter, silently counting to 10. Stacy was becoming increasingly difficult to handle. When did she become so bitter? I don't look like a beggar, Zachary said, looking hurt. Marybeth glanced at her son in the mirror and winked at him. Of course not, you're a good boy, she said to her son. She then noticed the sarcastic grin on her eldest daughter Stacy's face. Did you say that to all your men? Did you think they were smart, while they acted to you like the last lowlifes? Stacy asked. Marybeth sharply pressed the brake, slowing the car. She turned her head towards Stacy, her eyes blazing with anger. Did you say that on purpose? Get out of the car! What? Get out where? Stacy's eyes widened in surprise. You're only 20 meters away from the bus stop. Take the bus to school. I can't stand to see or hear you any longer. You've exhausted me so much this morning, I can't bear to be near you. You're going to throw me out into the cold just because you can't handle the truth? Stacy's voice quivered with outrage. The truth? Who says you're telling the truth? Who made you the arbiter of truth? Oh, to hell with you, Stacy shouted, then grabbed her school backpack and stormed out of the car, slamming the door loudly behind her. Marybeth glanced back and saw her youngest daughter's eyes filled with confusion and tears. Cheryl, why are you crying? Marybeth attempted to smile, but it came out forced and unnatural. Don't worry, everything's fine. Why did you kick Stacy out? Cheryl asked, her lower lip trembling. Marybeth felt nauseous at the sight of her younger daughter's upset state. She was tired of tolerating Stacy's antics. She had neither the strength nor the desire to put up with it any longer. How much longer could she allow Stacy to speak to her in such a tone? Marybeth, burdened by the constant problems of everyday life, lack of money and past mistakes, felt completely drained. She had no one to confide in about her life and her relationship with her daughter. Her friends were all more or less settled. Her mother had passed away long ago, her sister lived in another city, and their phone calls were like dry life updates. Cheryl, I didn't kick Stacy out. She decided to take the bus herself, Marybeth replied, trying to keep her voice soft. She didn't want her youngest daughter to turn out like her eldest. If that happened, Marybeth would consider herself a real failure for not being able to raise her children to be decent human beings. You yelled at her, and it's cold outside, Cheryl retorted, sniffling her nose. It's Stacy who yells at Mum all the time, Zachary interjected. Marybeth looked gratefully at her son. Despite her difficulties with her oldest daughter, her son was wonderful. Marybeth glanced at the clock and gasped. She was running out of time. She needed to drop the kids off at kindergarten and school, and then commute to her job in the city centre. Finally, fulfilling all her morning duties, Marybeth rushed into the hotel just in time to reach the reception desk. You're cutting it close, her co-worker exclaimed. It's almost 9. Do you want to get fired? Marybeth shook her head, catching her breath and untying the scarf around her neck. Their boss despised tardiness and other breaches of work ethics, and her primary threat was instant dismissal or disciplinary action, which invariably impacted the monthly bonus. Given Marybeth's financial situation heavily depended on this bonus, she made every attempt to avoid disciplinary action. I had to find a parking lot, Marybeth attempted to justify herself. After changing her clothes and taking her place at the reception desk, their megalomaniac boss appeared at the entrance. She glanced at Marybeth and her partner Cara, then at her watch, and gave a nod of greeting. Both women breathed a sigh of relief. Cara then left for home, while Marybeth, who had just arrived at work 10 minutes ago, looked at her back enviously. She too wished to go home, clean up, make a proper lunch and dinner, do the laundry, and relax in front of the TV with chips and juice. But instead, a long shift lay ahead, followed by a rushed trip home, grocery shopping, cooking, cleaning, arguments with Stacy, and the struggle to maintain self-control. After work, Marybeth, as planned, stopped at the supermarket for groceries and then headed home. It was almost 10 p.m. To Marybeth's surprise, only Zachary and Cheryl were home. Where's Stacy? Marybeth asked, while unpacking the groceries. Mum, what's for dinner? Zachary impatiently inquired, always hungry and eager to eat. Marybeth tried to think of something quick and easy to prepare for dinner, but her thoughts kept drifting back to her eldest daughter. Zachary, where's Stacy? Is she out for a walk? The son shrugged. I don't know. She brought Cheryl home from the kindergarten, then grabbed a bag and left. A bag? Marybeth stopped in her tracks. Why would she need it? What kind of bag? The brown one she usually takes to the gym. Marybeth glanced at the clock. 20 minutes to 11. Where could her eldest daughter have gone with her gym bag, which was quite roomy? Zachary, what did she say? She didn't say anything to me, muttered the son, as if Stacy ever told me anything. Marybeth grabbed her phone and dialed her daughter's number. Despite the long rings, Stacy didn't pick up. Furious and cursing under her breath, Marybeth was ready to break her rule of 10 and give her daughter a piece of her mind once she came home. The rule was that by 10 p.m. Stacy had to be home. If she was going to be late, she needed to inform her mother. But Stacy hadn't sent any messages, leaving Marybeth to worry and seethe in frustration. After several unsuccessful attempts to reach her daughter, Marybeth began to panic. The first snow was falling outside, and Stacy was out in her sneakers and coat, probably trying to prove a point to her mother. What an ungrateful child, Marybeth thought to herself as she prepared dinner, regretting her morning outburst. She should have kept her cool. After all, she knew what Stacy was like. At the start of the 12th hour, after putting Cheryl to bed, Marybeth continued to call her eldest daughter Stacy. She was inwardly terrified by her thoughts, which painted the most horrifying scenarios. What if Stacy had been kidnapped, had fallen into bad company, or even worse, had used something harmful? What if she was in danger, somewhere unknown and in a dreadful condition? Just as Marybeth was about to call the police, a message arrived at her phone from Stacy. "Don't look for me. I'm at a friend's house." The message was brief and vague. Which friend's house? For how long? Was Stacy even planning to return home? And when? Marybeth was left to wonder. She called her daughter again, but the answer was silence. "What friend? Why aren't you coming home?" Marybeth texted her. "I'm sick of dealing with you and the life we live. Pick Cheryl up from the kindergarten tomorrow and sort out your own problems." Stacy's response was full of anger and resentment. She had always been discontent with their lifestyle. In her eyes, her friends had much more than what Marybeth could provide. Despite Marybeth's best efforts, Stacy was always unhappy with what she had, or, more accurately, with what she didn't have. A new phone, trips to the sea, a father, a separate room, beautiful things. Things she saw at her friends and on the internet. In the solitude of the bathroom, Marybeth wept uncontrollably. Despite her best efforts to be a good mother, unlike her own, she felt she had failed. Her daughter Stacy despised her, viewing her as a failure and a non-achiever. There were no normal men on Marybeth's path. They were either married men or drunken loafers seeking an ego boost. Who would want a woman nearing 40 with 3 children? Exiting the bathroom, Marybeth bumped into Zachary, who was surprisingly awake and wandering the hallway. "Why aren't you asleep?" Marybeth asked, concern evident in her voice. "You've been crying, haven't you?" Zachary observed, worry filling his gaze. Marybeth suddenly realized that her tear-streaked face was a clear giveaway. "Go to bed, Zachary." She gently stroked his head, but he abruptly pulled away and scrutinized her. "You cried because of Stacy, didn't you?" he asked. Marybeth merely nodded and sighed heavily. Even a 10-year-old could sense the tension between her and her eldest daughter. "I'm worried about her," Marybeth admitted. Zachary abruptly walked over to his mother and hugged her tightly. "Mum, don't cry because of Stacy. She's just mean," Zachary said. Marybeth only managed a sad smile, holding her son close. "She's just jealous of everyone. That's why she's so mean." "She's not mean. She just lacks what others have." Zachary pulled away from Marybeth and shook his head. "No, Mum. She has everything. What doesn't she have? She has a house, food, you, me, Cheryl. What else does she need? A new smartphone?" "Probably," Marybeth said, grinning, "though I don't have the money to buy her one." "Then let her go out and earn it herself," Zachary said, resentment in his voice. "You don't need to buy her expensive cell phone. Let her work and earn it. She said about Katie Lenehan that her mother made her work so she could buy what she wanted." Marybeth looked at her son in surprise. "Katie? Working? And where does she work?" "She hands out advertisements in a shopping centre. She also works for her father's firm, doing something with documents. He pays her for it, while Stacy thinks you should buy her everything for free. It's not fair." "Do you know where she is now?" Marybeth asked, hope evident in her voice. "I do not know. Maybe at her boyfriend's," Zachary replied. Marybeth looked surprised. "Boyfriend? Stacy has a boyfriend?" Zachary nodded. "Stacy thinks I'm clueless, that I'm stupid. But I saw her with a guy from the graduating class. They were hugging. She thinks she's very mature. That's why she's talking to you like that. She thinks we're all stupid, even Cheryl. But that's not fair. We're not silly." "No, of course not," Marybeth replied, her worry increasing. She never suspected her eldest daughter had a boyfriend. Maybe Zachary misunderstood, or assumed Stacy had a boyfriend just because he saw her hugging someone. It didn't necessarily mean that Stacy was seriously involved with a boy. Marybeth had a restless night, tossing and turning until morning. She woke up feeling drained, as if she hadn't slept at all. After washing her face, she prepared breakfast for her children, dropped them off at kindergarten and school, and couldn't stop thinking about her eldest daughter. If she could turn back time, Marybeth would do everything possible to ensure her daughter wasn't so resentful, overly independent, and superior to others. "What's wrong?" her partner asked when he saw Marybeth at the reception desk that morning. "You look like you've been run over by a tractor." "To be honest, I feel the same way," Marybeth replied. Seeing her reflection in the hotel lobby mirror, she was taken aback. Dark circles under her eyes, deeper wrinkles, and dishevelled hair were visible, all because a 16-year-old girl thought she was too old. "Why don't you take a sick day? Our boss would be furious if she saw you like this." "I'll have a coffee and I'll be fine," Marybeth said. But the coffee didn't help. Waves of fatigue washed over her, and her eyes felt heavy. Marybeth yawned continuously, looking at the clock, hoping the hands would move faster and end her grueling workday. Marybeth knew she needed to contact Stacy's teacher to check if her eldest daughter had attended school. However, her manager strictly prohibited phone usage during work hours. She was afraid to take the risk, knowing that any violation could lead to disciplinary action and potentially a loss of her bonus. "What's going on with you today?" her supervisor asked when Marybeth yawned widely, thinking no one could see her. Quickly covering her mouth, Marybeth felt her face drain of colour. "I'm sorry, Francesca," Marybeth apologized, trying to gauge from her boss's face whether she would lose her bonus or be fired for a simple yawn at work. "I'm just tired." "You're not even 40. To be tired in the middle of the day?" the woman replied sternly. "Are you aware that the guest from room 305 still hasn't checked out, though it's already 2 o'clock in the afternoon?" Marybeth felt a chill. Indeed, it was already past 2, and she had forgotten about the problem guest that Kara had warned her about in the morning. He had arrived at the hotel drunk the previous night, and it was clear he was going to be trouble. "Sorry, Francesca, I'll fix it right away," Marybeth assured her. "Of course you will," the boss retorted, glaring at Marybeth with a disgruntled expression. "And if I hadn't reminded you about him, what would have happened? He would have overslept and left without paying for another night. I'm not pleased with your performance lately. Pull yourself together, or I'll recommend your dismissal." Marybeth couldn't let that happen. Becoming unemployed with 3 children and a sick mother-in-law was unthinkable. Finding a decent job with a stable and fair income was challenging in their small town. Marybeth hurried to room 305. After much difficulty, she managed to wake the sleeping guest. She then spent another hour explaining that he needed to pay for an extra night. "No way," he argued, shaking his head. "It's not my fault no one woke me up. That's your problem, not mine. I won't pay." Upon learning that the guest had checked out almost at 3 o'clock in the afternoon, without agreeing to pay for the extra day, Francesca was furious. Marybeth sobbed as she listened to her boss's harsh words, who had decided to deduct the cost of the extra day from Marybeth's salary. "But it's too large a sum," Marybeth calculated in her mind, realizing that it was almost the cost of her shift. "He was only 3 hours late. The new guest hasn't arrived yet, and the room will be cleaned by the time he does. Let me just pay for these 3 hours, please." "No," Francesca retorted. "I'm not doing this Because I'm nasty. I'm doing it to make you take your job responsibilities more seriously. After your shift, come to me and sign up a request for a deduction from your paycheck." Marybeth couldn't bear it, breaking into tears in front of her boss. But where was the justice? Why did everything seem so unbearably heavy today? With her daughter, the problems at work, and her mental state. Where could she find the strength to bear all these burdens without losing hope? That evening, Stacy didn't return home again, but she picked up her younger sister from kindergarten. Cheryl couldn't provide any details about Stacy, neither where she'd been, how she looked, nor her mood. Zachary informed her mother that Stacy had taken more of her belongings, which indicated one thing: the stubborn girl had no plans to return home. Marybeth spent all evening trying to reach her daughter, but she stubbornly refused to answer the phone. In desperation, Marybeth went to her daughter's school the next morning to speak with her teacher and catch a glimpse of her. "Stacy hasn't been to school for 3 days now," the teacher said, dismayed. "I thought she was sick." Marybeth was stunned. It turned out that Stacy had not only withdrawn from her family, but also from her studies. "Mrs. Walsh, do you know where your daughter is?" asked the teacher, and Marybeth, unable to answer, broke down in tears. "She's left home," Marybeth managed to say, sobbing and sniffling, accepting a tissue from the teacher. "We're having a difficult time at home. Stacy is out of control." "I'll need to inform the principal," the teacher said, but Marybeth looked at her with a pleading expression. "Please don't say anything. I will find my daughter. I will do everything to make her see reason. I beg you, help me." The teacher softened. "All right, but you need to resolve this with your daughter by the end of the week. If the school discovers that I knew about your family issues and I didn't report them, I could be in trouble too." Marybeth nodded, her mind racing about what to do next. Where should she go? What should she do? She picked up her phone and texted her daughter. "If you don't show up at school tomorrow, the child welfare authorities may take you away. Is that what you want?" A few minutes later, her daughter replied, "I will go to school, but only to avoid being sent back to you by child welfare." She capitalized the word "you" to emphasize that she left home because of her mum. Then, on break, Marybeth came up to Stacy's friend Katie and asked her, "Do you know where Stacy is?" But the girl waved her off. "Mrs. Walsh, stop interrogating me. Solve your daughter's problems on your own and leave me out of it." "I won't bother you," Marybeth promised, desperate to learn the truth about her eldest daughter's life. "Just tell me where she lives. I won't go there, but I'll be at peace, knowing. Can't you understand what it's like to lose a child?" "You didn't lose Stacy," Katie shrugged. "She left you willingly, and honestly, I understand why. You've been hard on her with your instructions." "Me?" Marybeth asked, taken aback. "What did she tell you? Katie, don't keep quiet." "Sorry, Mrs. Walsh. My next class is about to start. And, for the record, Stacy isn't living with me, so don't look for her at my place. She isn't living with any girl either." Marybeth leaned tiredly against the cool wall and closed her eyes. Her daughter, 16 years old, apparently thinks she's too old. She's living with some guy who's bound to turn out to be a scumbag. What was going on in Stacy's head? What was she doing? What was she thinking? Marybeth was left wondering about Stacy's thoughts and actions. At that moment, she received a call from her mother-in-law's nurse. The caregiver worked at the woman's house on Marybeth's workdays. Today was Marybeth's day off, and she was expected to cover for the caregiver. Between school and concern for Stacy, Marybeth had lost track of time. "Holly, I'm on my way!" Marybeth nearly shouted into the phone. "Please, be patient for about 40 minutes. I'll stop by the pharmacy and then I'll be there." "Mrs. Walsh." The woman's voice was reproachful. "We had an agreement. I have my own plans and things to do." Marybeth sighed. As if problems with her work and daughter weren't enough, she now had to deal with the caregiver's displeasure. Marybeth valued Holly very much for cooking, cleaning, treating bed sores, administering injections, and even partially rehabilitating Marybeth's mother-in-law, who had suffered a stroke 2 years prior, resulting in the complete loss of sensation in her legs. Holly waited for Marybeth in the hallway, ready to dash off for her own errands. "Mrs. Walsh, please don't do that again." Marybeth apologized, handing the caregiver the money, and moved into the room where her mother-in-law lay. The entire house bore the scent of illness and medication. Being in this apartment was always a mental challenge for Marybeth. Sarah was in bed, flipping through a book. On seeing Marybeth, she gave a weak smile. "Hello, daughter." "Hello, Sarah. How are you feeling?" "My dear, nothing has changed in the 2 days you've been gone." Sarah's speech had almost fully recovered from her stroke, but her legs had not. The stroke had paralyzed her lower body, rendering her unable to stand, move, use the bathroom, bathe without help, and generally confined her to her bed. Holly, who Marybeth found after an extensive search among other caregivers, was the only one willing to work for not much money. She would arrive in the morning and in the evening, but was always ready to return if Sarah needed help, as she lived just 2 houses away. Marybeth made her mother-in-law's bed and assisted her to the bathroom, where Sarah washed herself on her own. Afterward, they settled in the kitchen for tea. Sarah could move around the house in a wheelchair, but the room's dimensions and inconvenient doorways made it impossible for her to change room by herself. When either Holly or Marybeth was present, they would transfer her into an armchair and move her around the apartment. However, the outdoor walks were still problematic. The building was not equipped with ramps, an elevator, and Sarah lived on the 3rd floor, so her time outdoors was limited to reading or people watching from the balcony, while seated in her wheelchair. "It's so good when you come," said the mother-in-law cheerfully to Marybeth, who returned a weary smile. "Holly tries, but she's still a stranger to me, and doesn't treat my care as reverently as you do." "Holly is just not a people person," Marybeth explained. "Her son is troublesome. She worries about him. She took this job solely to help him. It's better to have a troublesome son than a son like mine," Sarah said sadly, then shook her head. "Anyway, let's not dwell on sad things. How are the children? How are Cheryl and Zachary?" Marybeth mentally noted that her mother-in-law had again only asked about her younger children. For Sarah, Marybeth's eldest daughter Stacy, who was from another man, practically didn't exist. Sarah rarely asked about Stacy, and Stacy herself hadn't visited her since her stroke. And now her mother-in-law was only interested in Marybeth's children by Scott. Not a single word about Stacy. "It's all right, Sarah," Marybeth answered evasively. "Zachary is studying and Cheryl is in the kindergarten. She's already preparing for Christmas. She'll be either a snowflake or a squirrel again." "How lovely!" Sarah's lips stretched into a smile. "My little girl is going to perform on stage. It's a pity I won't get to see her." "I'll keep it on camera, and then I'll show you everything," Marybeth replied. "Sarah, would you like to come to get some air on the balcony? I can dress you warmly and take you out. What do you think?" The woman-in-law agreed. Marybeth carefully dried her mother-in-law's hair, put on her warm pants and sweater, tied a scarf, and then wheeled her onto the balcony. It wasn't too cold outside, especially not on the balcony, but Marybeth didn't want to risk exposing a sick woman to the chance of catching a cold. In her situation, any illness could be a disaster, and Marybeth already had enough problems. Sitting in the room, watching Sarah as she curiously observed the street and passers-by, Marybeth reflected on how much her life had changed in the past 3 years. Just 3 years ago, she had no idea what lay ahead. She was oblivious to what was happening to her husband, whom she loved and was faithful to. Sarah's room still displayed wedding pictures of Scott and Marybeth. They looked blissfully happy in those pictures. Marybeth was confident that they were in for a long and carefree life together, believing all difficulties were behind them. "Do you still love me?" Scott used to ask frequently. Marybeth always smiled, nodded, kissed him, leaned into his shoulder, and felt as if he was in a fairy tale. Scott was her prince, a man unafraid to marry a woman with a child, aware of her difficult past, and ready to accept her as she was. "I don't think I've ever loved anyone as much as I love you," Marybeth would reply. However, she never felt entirely sincere. She did truly love Scott, more than her first love, who had left a deep scar on her heart. When she married Scott, Marybeth tried to convince herself that this was true. She believed Scott would be her first and her only lawful spouse, with whom she would have children and live a long and happy life. "Do you only think so, or are you sure of it?" Scott asked in a jealous voice. Marybeth laughed, considering that if her husband was this jealous, he must love her deeply. Marybeth met Scott 11 years ago. At the time, her daughter Stacey was 5 years old. Marybeth, weary of solitude and having lost faith in genuine feelings and strong relationships, found her heart, which she thought was securely shut, slowly starting to open. Scott was very persistent in his courtship. "I have a child," Marybeth cautioned, but Scott wasn't deterred by the presence of a 5-year-old daughter in his beloved's family. "So what? Do you think that if a woman has a child, she no longer has the right to happiness with a man?" "I don't believe it's possible to be happy with a man," Marybeth replied, being as sincere as possible in expressing her deepest feelings. "Believe me, you can," Scott smiled, showering Marybeth with flowers and compliments. He managed to build a rapport with Stacey, and they began to spend more time together as a trio. This was critical to Marybeth, seeing that the man she had opened her heart to could get along with her own daughter. Marybeth was curious about rushing into a relationship with Scott. She observed him diligently, trying to avoid the same mistakes she had made before meeting him. Everything changed when Marybeth discovered she was pregnant. "I'm pregnant," she told Scott, her voice filling with confusion. She wasn't ready for another motherhood, but it was more than just welcoming a new life. It was about building a family with Scott. "I'm so glad," Scott responded, his eyes shining with joy, delight, and anticipation. "I wanted a baby. I want you to give me a son." "And what if it's a daughter?" Marybeth asked cautiously. Seeing Scott's joyful expression, she felt reassured. "Then we'll have a daughter first and a son later," he confidently replied. Soon after they got married, Marybeth and her daughter Stacey moved from their hostel at the sewing factory, where Marybeth worked as a seamstress, to Scott's apartment. "I don't want you to work at the sewing factory," Scott said. "It's hard work, and you're pregnant." "But there aren't many good jobs in the city," Marybeth countered. "Where would I go? And I'm pregnant." "You'll come to our construction company," Scott replied confidently, leaving Marybeth amazed. "In construction while being pregnant is better than working in a garment factory?" He chuckled. "I'm not suggesting you work on the construction site itself. My director needs an assistant to cover for his employee's absence. She's having elective surgery, and it'll take at least 4 months to recover. So you'll work instead." You need a calm, stable job, and my boss needs a secretary. Your tasks won't be complex, just filing documents and serving tea to visitors. It's no more complicated than your current job." Marybeth didn't object. Furthermore, the Scott salary offered was almost double her factory wage. The contract was temporary, but convenient, and Marybeth was glad anyway. But of course, she found it difficult to believe that things could line up so well. For over 5 years, she had lived without the hope of meeting a good man who would take care for her and her child. Then Scott entered her life, bringing with him a new job, a better dwelling, and a supportive mother-in-law. When Zachary was born, Marybeth was immersed in the challenges of motherhood. Having had experience with a small child, she didn't encounter any particular difficulties with the baby. Sarah supported her, and Scott worked diligently to save money for a larger house. "We're cramped in this 2-bedroom apartment," he reasoned. "I believe we can afford a 3- or 4-bedroom apartment in a year or 2, and then we'll have another child." Marybeth smiled contentedly. She felt joyful. Life with Scott was peaceful and straightforward. He tackled all problems without creating new ones. As planned, Scott managed to save enough money within 2 years for the family to move into a 3-bedroom apartment. Then he started contemplating another child. "Are you sure, Scott?" Marybeth asked, her voice filled with doubt. "I'd like to return to work. After Zachary's birth, I've been confined to the house. I feel like I could be more useful if I worked." "You are working," replied her husband. "You're serving as my wife, the mother of our children, and the caretaker of our home. While Zachary is small, you can stay home with him. No need to request leave or sick days from a boss. I earn enough money. You can continue managing the household. Once we have another child, we can discuss your return to work." Marybeth no longer argued with her husband. Scott, having accepted that he made all the critical decisions in their family. He earned the income, wisely managed the budget, and ensured that Marybeth and their children had everything they needed. Marybeth's mother-in-law also played a vital role in this arrangement. She was still working and helped support her son's family both financially and by babysitting the children. When Marybeth discovered she was pregnant with her 3rd child, everyone was delighted. But when Cheryl was born, something in the family changed. Marybeth noticed Scott distancing from her for reasons unknown, and she only learned after Scott's death that he had been seeing another woman since her pregnancy, and until Cheryl turned 2. That day he was driving from work, and there was another woman next to him, and they got into a fatal accident. Scott and the woman were killed on the spot. Later at the funeral, the woman's husband told Marybeth the truth. It turns out that she had already filed for divorce from him, and Scott was going to leave his family, but he did not have an opportunity to do it. "I knew everything," Marybeth's mother-in-law confessed 40 days after Scott's funeral. "I knew about Rose, that she was pregnant, and that he was planning to leave you for her." "Why didn't you tell me?" Marybeth asked, feeling betrayed once again, this time by her deceased husband's mother. His death, the news of his affair, and now her mother-in-law's words, it all felt like a vicious cycle Marybeth was struggling to escape. "Because I was against it," Sarah retorted. "I tried to reason with Scott, to make him see sense. He had children, responsibilities. He swore he wouldn't abandon his children, but he wouldn't leave Rose either. God punished him. Him, me, and Rose." "He punished me too, didn't he?" Marybeth cried, feeling her strength to shed tears waning. "You were simply a victim of circumstances," her mother-in-law had said. Sarah was deeply affected by the death of her only son, Scott. The once active woman quit her job, became a recluse, stopped interacting with friends and visiting her grandchildren, and suffered a stroke less than a year later. Marybeth, by that time, had managed to find a job as a hotel administrator. Job opportunities in the town were scarce. The garment factory had shut down, and all the decent-paying jobs were taken. It was challenging for Marybeth to find work without good experiences or a good education. And now 3 years after Scott's passing, Marybeth was still struggling to move on. Financial difficulties persisted, and her oldest daughter added to the stress. Meanwhile, Marybeth's mother-in-law interrupted her painful reminiscing. A knock on the balcony door signalled she was ready to return inside. Marybeth glanced away from the wedding photo, no longer holding any significance, and helped get the wheelchair-bound woman back into the apartment. "What's interesting outside?" Marybeth asked routinely, assisting Sarah with her clothes. "Nothing. Just grandmothers sitting on the bench discussing someone. If I were healthier, I'd sit downstairs with them and gather gossip." Marybeth didn't reply. She was eager to return home and start her numerous chores, awaiting her at home. Changing the linens, doing laundry, preparing dinner, and making lunch for the next day. Stacy used to assist her, but now she lived elsewhere, so there were no expectations of help from her. "May I leave now, Sarah?" Marybeth asked. Her mother-in-law nodded sadly. "Of course, go. You have your day off. You've helped me, fed me, bathed me, walked me. Thank you, dear, for not leaving me alone." Marybeth bid her mother-in-law goodbye and headed home. Her car was stuttering, and the revs were jumping, indicating it needed repairs. How long could she continue driving this old car before it broke down in the middle of the city? She would need to call a tow truck, take it to a service station, an expense that her modest single-mother budget hadn't anticipated. "Hold on, dear," Marybeth coaxed her car, which alternated between sneezing and stalling. "Just hold on until the advance payment, then I'll get you fixed." Marybeth realized it needed new spark plugs, an oil change, and a replacement battery. The list of necessary repairs made her uneasy, especially as she didn't have any spare money. The car was her only means of transportation. Without it, she would have to rely on bus or taxi rides for her daily commute. It would be too inconvenient due to her way of life. Spitefully, her car refused to start the next morning. It was Saturday, so she didn't need to commute to school or kindergarten. However, she still had to figure out how to get the car to the repair shop and visit her ailing mother-in-law. Resigned, Marybeth opened the box where she had been saving money for emergencies. She sighed heavily, realizing the entire savings would now be spent on car repairs. She wouldn't be able to afford a new winter jacket or boots, and would have to wear her old clothes. However, the immediate concern was repairing a car. How was she going to get to school, work, and her mother-in-law's place without a car? Luckily, her kind neighbour, who had noticed her struggles, offered to tow the car to the repair shop. Gratefully, Marybeth accepted. An hour later, she dropped off her car for repair, hailed a taxi, and headed to her mother-in-law's house. Later that day, Marybeth decided it was time to seek new employment. She wondered if she could split her work week at a different job, or spend her evenings cleaning offices. Money was tight, but her desire to provide for her children was strong. She browsed several online job postings, updated her resume, and sent it to various companies. She considered many roles: an administrator at a restaurant, a seller of household goods at a store, or a housekeeper at a country house. Feeling accomplished, Marybeth started cooking when she heard the front door open. Knowing her other children, Zachary and Cheryl, were already home, she assumed it was her eldest daughter, Stacy. Indeed, Stacy stood in the hallway with her bag, visibly displeased to be home. Marybeth greeted her, deciding not to cause a scene. After all, she knew Stacy would have countless rebuttals to any criticism. "Hi," mumbled Stacy as she removed her coat. "Thought I wasn't coming back already?" Marybeth shook her head. "I've been waiting for you every minute. Are you hungry?" she asked. Stacy glanced at her mother with a look of hunger. Marybeth felt a mix of emotions towards her daughter. On one hand, she felt sorry for Stacy, who, in an attempt to assert her independence and adulthood, had proven to be a small, helpless girl who was forced to return home. On the other hand, Marybeth knew This was inevitable. Starting an independent life at 16, without being prepared, was foolish and reckless. Despite her claims of maturity and wisdom, Stacy was far from it in reality. That evening, the whole family shared dinner. For the first time in several days, Marybeth felt a sense of calm, despite the challenges that lay ahead. Zachary occasionally glanced at his older sister, but remained silent. Marybeth refrained from reprimanding anyone further. The next morning, Marybeth awoke in a less gloomy mood, unlike the preceding days. Even the sight of Francesca at the reception desk didn't dampen her spirits. "Go to the accounting department to write an application for withholding," Francesca reminded. Marybeth merely nodded in response. She had little hope that her supervisor would forget the incident involving the guest who fell asleep. And then, after lunch, she received a call from the restaurant inviting her for an interview. Could this be the end of my bad luck? Marybeth thought, feeling a surge of hope. The meeting with the restaurant director was scheduled for the next day, after 2100. Now she had to figure out how to have time to prepare dinner and supervise the children before school and kindergarten. "Don't worry, I'll handle everything," Stacy told her in the evening, after Marybeth mentioned her interview. "You can go without concern." Marybeth was taken aback. Stacy seemed sombre, but less confrontational than usual. What had happened while she was away? Had the young man she was living with hurt her? Marybeth considered asking Stacy, but didn't dare risk disturbing the fragile peace that had returned to their family. "Thank you, Stacy," was all Marybeth could say, looking gratefully at her eldest daughter. The sudden snowfall the following day disrupted all plans. Hailing a cab after work became a significant challenge. Marybeth, who had hoped to secure a new job, suddenly worried she might lose her opportunity to make a good impression. Her shift worker was also late due to the weather, leaving no spare time and exacerbating an already tough situation. Bundled in her coat and using her scarf to shield her head from the wind, Marybeth tried to find a ride. Cars kept driving past. No one seemed willing to help with this weather, even for a fee. "Excuse me, do you know the bus schedule?" Marybeth turned to see an elderly man addressing her, as there was no one else around. She noticed that he wasn't dressed for the weather. He wore a thin jacket, a cap, and shoes with thin soles. She wondered where he could have come from in this weather and at this hour. "Grandfather, the buses don't run too late anymore," Marybeth said back. "It's almost 9 in the evening. Now the only option is a cab." "A cab?" The elderly man looked at her incredulously. "And how do I find one?" "By calling a phone number, or from application. But there are no cars available, I tried." "I'm so cold," the elderly man complained. Marybeth looked at him in surprise. Given the weather and his condition, it was no wonder he was cold. "I need to see my son. I promised to meet him, and he'll be waiting for me at the train station. I got on the wrong bus and ended up downtown. How can I get to there now?" Marybeth only wanted to tell him that she couldn't help, but just then a car stopped nearby. "Where do you need to go?" asked the driver. Looking at the elderly man, Marybeth confidently replied, "First to the train station, then to the Grand Restaurant." When the driver said his fee, Marybeth exclaimed, "Such a large fee for a 15-minute drive?" But there was no other choice, so she carefully helped the elderly man into the back seat and sat next to him. "I only have a few bucks with me," the elderly man complained, rummaging in his jacket pocket. "I'll pay for it. You can get off at the station, and I'll continue on my way." "But I can't do that," the elderly man protested. "It's not fair. Let me give you a part of the sum now, and the other later, so we will be even." "Let's keep driving and not distract the driver," Mary suggested. "No, that won't do," the elderly man insisted, reaching into his pocket again. I want to pay the fare." "Let's not worry about the fare now, as you might need the money later." Marybeth decided not to argue with him, knowing it was pointless and potentially harmful to the man's nerves to do so. "I'll give you my address, and you can bring me the money when you have it. Or your son is coming to visit you, so he might be able to bring me the money then." The elderly man reluctantly agreed. Marybeth scribbled her address on a piece of notebook paper, slid it into the man's jacket pocket, then checked her watch and sighed with relief. She still had enough time. After dropping off a random traveller at the station, Marybeth said goodbye and waved him off. She hoped this good deed would bring her luck in landing a job. The interview result was uncertain, but Marybeth liked the restaurant, the working conditions, and the director, a pleasant woman, around 45 years old. "Thank you for coming," the director said. "We have more candidates, so we'll be in touch with the outcome." Marybeth nodded, not losing hope. She hitchhiked home again, spending half as much money this time, but it still strained her modest budget. "Mum, Stacey cooked pilaf," Zachary greeted Marybeth at the door, looking satisfied. "And it was delicious." Marybeth stood frozen in disbelief. Her usually critical daughter had cooked something herself. Marybeth had no idea that her oldest daughter, Stacey, even knew how to cook. "Stacey, is this true?" Marybeth asked as she entered the kitchen and saw the sink full of dirty dishes. "Did you cook all this yourself?" "How long should we wait for you?" Stacey replied in her usual manner. "Cheryl and Zachary wanted to eat, and I prepared the meal. Try it. You might not like it." Marybeth sat at the table, and a plate of pilaf appeared before her. It wasn't authentic pilaf, just a mix of rice, vegetables and meat, but it was excellent. "Very tasty," Marybeth exclaimed, finishing her portion in minutes. "I was just wondering what to cook on my way home, and you're my clever girl." Stacey gave a faint smile, quickly suppressing it. Marybeth felt so light and relaxed that she felt like jumping up and dancing around the kitchen. To hell with financial difficulties. Who cares about the lack of a personal life? She had wonderful children. Even Stacey, with whom her relationship had seemed irrevocably damaged, had suddenly cooked a good meal and was no longer at odds with her mother. In the morning, Marybeth peered out the window and decided not to send her older kids to school or trudge her younger daughter through the snowdrifts to kindergarten. "How about a lazy day?" she suggested, flinging open the curtains. Cheryl and Zachary responded with enthusiastic applause. Stacey was more restrained, but the relief on her face was evident. She was pleased not to have to navigate the freshly fallen snow. Together they prepared and enjoyed breakfast. Afterward, they settled on the living room couch and began debating what to watch on TV. "Cartoon!" demanded Cheryl. "Cartoons are for babies. Let's watch a samurai movie," argued Zachary. "I'll browse the internet in my room," Stacey mumbled before retreating to the bedroom. Marybeth managed to convince the younger children to watch an animal movie, but only under the conditions that a cartoon for Cheryl and a samurai movie for Zachary would follow. Just as the three of them were finishing the cartoon, the doorbell rang. "I'll open it." Stacey emerged from her bedroom and headed for the door. "Mum, for you," she shouted from the hallway. Surprised by the weekday visitor, Marybeth went to the door. To her surprise, it was the elderly man, to whom she had paid the fare to the station. "Oh, how persistent he is! A man of his word," Marybeth thought to herself, returning his smile. This time, the elderly man was dressed appropriately for the weather, a long insulated coat, a knitted hat, and boots with thick soles. "Come in. Why are you standing at the entrance?" Marybeth attempted to invite the elderly man inside, but he declined. She then noticed another figure standing next to him. The entrance light was off, and she didn't immediately recognize the second man. "This is my son, Robert. the elderly man said proudly, and the younger man stepped forward. Upon seeing him, Marybeth faltered. "It can't be. There's no such thing," she exclaimed. She looked at the man, unable to discern if it was a dream or reality. "Robert!" The man extended his hand to Marybeth, but his hand hung in the air. "Marybeth, is that you?" "It's me," she replied, feeling the blood drain from her face. "Are you feeling ill?" he asked, stepping closer. Marybeth shook her head in denial and looked helplessly at the old man. "Come in the house," she said with a weak voice, then disappeared into the kitchen. She needed a moment to catch her breath and gather her thoughts. Without turning back, she knew Robert was in the same room. She could hear his breathing in the silence. It even seemed like she could hear her own heart pounding in her chest. "I never thought I'd see you again," Robert said, breaking the silence. Marybeth turned to see him standing in the kitchen entrance, while his father sat at the table. "So do I." "So did I." Stacy entered the kitchen, looking around in surprise before turning to her mother with a questioning look. "Shall I put the kettle on?" she asked. Marybeth nodded in response. Robert glanced at Stacy, his gaze lingering on the girl. The unasked question hung in the air, but Marybeth understood what Robert intended to ask. Marybeth and Robert had met 20 years ago during their first year at the college. After a couple of months, it was clear that there was more than just friendship and the casual conversation between them. Marybeth was in love for the first time, truly and deeply. The mere thought of Robert made her heart flutter. Robert reciprocated her feelings and didn't hide them. It seemed that a happy future was ahead of them. However, Robert's mother, Anna, worked as a dean, and she did not approve of her son's relationship with a girl from a troubled family. "You're not a match for my son," Anna had declared on her first meeting with Marybeth. Marybeth, in love with Robert, dismissed the warnings of his protective mother. Robert was an adult and could make his own decisions. At least, that's what Marybeth believed. They met secretly at her dormitory, away from the prying eyes of Anna. However, Anna was aware of their continuing relationship. She was filled with frustration, but she felt powerless. "I love you," Robert once professed to Marybeth, and she completely trusted his words. She was in her final year when she discovered she was pregnant. The doctor who confirmed her pregnancy was a friend of Anna, and she promptly informed her about that. "Here's the money," said the woman, appearing in Marybeth's room. "Get rid of it. It's enough for the procedure and moral compensation. Leave my son alone." "I did not molest him," trying to keep cool, Marybeth replied. "We love each other, and I'm not going to do what you asked." "What a fool," blurted out Anna. "You're putting a collar around your own neck. Do you know that Robert has another woman? My friend's daughter, a beautiful and very smart girl. With you he sleeps, and she will marry." Marybeth felt the blood drain from her face. "It's not true, you're lying," she exclaimed. The woman's face turned red. "I've never deceived anyone, but you, on the other hand, could be capable of such deceit. You come from a family of alcoholics who only know how to lie to get money for a bottle. My son won't marry you. He was just using you for his pleasure. It's better if you take the money and do what I told you to do." "Or what?" challenged Marybeth. "Or I'll do anything to have you expelled from the college and leave you without a job or means of support." Marybeth responded with a defiant shake of her head. As soon as Anna left, Marybeth immediately called Robert. He didn't answer, and in the following days he didn't appear in the college. Later, she was told that Robert's grandmother had fallen ill, and he had gone to her in another state. Marybeth tried to call him, but he didn't pick up, and then the only response was the mechanical voice of the answering machine. "The subscriber is temporarily unavailable." As Anna had threatened, Marybeth was expelled from the college for violating the discipline. This left Marybeth without a diploma and without the opportunity to live in a dormitory, but she had a healthy daughter, whom she named after her grandmother. Marybeth and Robert didn't see each other for 17 years. Now he stood in her kitchen next to her daughter, looking into her face. "Let's talk," he suggested. "About what?" she shrugged. "It's been so many years. What should we talk about?" "Maybe about the fact that I might have a child?" Upon hearing the conversation, Stacy flinched and looked at her mother. Marybeth decided there was no point in lying or withholding the truth. Everyone was an adult and understood that any lie would eventually be revealed. "You do have a daughter. It's strange that you didn't care for all 16 years of her life." The elderly man sitting at the table, waiting for tea, looked anxiously at everyone. "Son, what is this woman saying? Do you have a child?" "Your son has a daughter," Marybeth responded on behalf of Robert, "whom your wife adamantly refused to acknowledge or meet. She ensured your son was oblivious to the existence of his daughter. Or didn't she? Or was it just Robert who didn't want to know?" Tears began to well up in Marybeth's eyes. She didn't want to fight them, nor did she want to lie or pry. She simply wished to bury herself in the blanket and hide from everything. "I did want to know. My mother hastily sent me to my grandmother's due to her bad health. I didn't even get a chance to bid you farewell. My mother took the phone and claimed that she'd lost it. I believed her. Yes, I always trusted my mum. I tried to reach you out through friends, wanting to know your whereabouts and how you were doing, but you were no longer at college. It was only before her death that my mother confessed everything. She regretted her actions. Our town is too small for you to not find me," Marybeth retorted, "and it appears you aren't as persistent as your parents." Perhaps. Robert was now looking at Stacy, and she kept her gaze on her father. "Except that you got married, changed your last name, and I realized that it was too late to change anything. You had your life, I had mine. We'd gone our separate ways. I got married 5 years after I gave birth to Stacy. You had 5 years to find me and your daughter." "All those 5 years, I knew nothing about having a daughter at all." Marybeth couldn't contain herself any longer and burst into tears. Stacy ran up to her mother to hug her, tears spilling from both of them, out of resentment, anger, hopelessness, and longing. An hour later, everyone was sitting quietly at the table drinking tea. The elderly man, who was the main reason for the reunion, was silent and occasionally dabbed his eyes with a paper napkin. Robert looked at Marybeth, who averted her eyes. She felt a painful, yet incredibly relieving sensation, as if a massive avalanche of emotion had covered her. For 17 years, Marybeth seemed to live a life that wasn't her own, and now she stood at the threshold of significant change. She didn't know whether these changes would be for the better or not, but she was determined not to let herself be hurt again. "Mum confessed everything to me 5 years after we broke up," Robert said. "She was gravely ill and tormented, not so much physically but morally, because she realized that you went against her and had a child. This meant that somewhere out there was her only grandchild, a child she would never see. Mum regretted what she did to you, and most of all she regretted that she would never be able to ask you for your forgiveness." "Do you have any other children?" Stacy asked Robert. "Unfortunately, no. I was married, but I didn't feel real. All these years, I felt as if I was playing a role. I worked hard, earned money, helped others, but I failed to help my daughter. I suppose there's no forgiveness for me." "There is," Stacy answered unexpectedly. "Forgiveness is always necessary. Right, Mum?" You'll forgive me for acting like a fool, won't you? I behaved poorly and regretted it. Then I saw other parents and realised that you're not just good, but the best." Marybeth smiled through her tears. The phone rang. It was the director of the restaurant where Marybeth had an interview the previous day. "Hello? We are ready to offer you a job," the woman said. "Are you ready to start working?" "Ready," Marybeth replied, realising that she was prepared for everything. A new job and a new life. If fate gave her a second chance to meet Robert again, it must mean something.